Welcome to Sykes Peak, the podcast that's going to change the world one person at a time.
Welcome back to Sykes Peak, where we discuss various issues in mental health and psychology, helping to change the world one mind at a time. I'm Sean Van. I'm joined today with
Dr. Keith Roach.
And we're continuing our discussion on trauma, stress, anxiety. We've dealt pretty heavily with trauma in the last couple episodes, and really kind of talked really kind of nerdy about a lot of the science, and given some good key examples and had some good conversation about that.
We can get down and nerdy.
We can.
I know, that was pitiful. That was pitiful. Yeah, but I mean, we can get even more nerdy because we haven't even talked about the neurotransmitters that are involved in the process.
Yeah, neuroscience.
But I believe that in the next couple of episodes that we will discuss how trauma affects
absolutely
neurotransmitters for generations.
Yes.
So, so the question comes up for you, Sean, what role does trauma play in stress and anxiety?
Right.
So first we need to understand the difference between the differences in understanding stress, because we have, normal everyday stress is just normal everyday stress.
Right.
I believe that that the researchers and scientists and whatever and theorists have come up with different names for stress, distress, e-stress, different things along that line. Is all stress bad?
No. Oh, no, not at all. Stress, like you were saying, we've talked before about a lot of different topics, and I would say that a lot of emotions are like road signs. Sometimes you need the green light, sometimes you need the red light. You need the good and the bad, and they work to help you in different situations. The parasympathetic, that relief system, is what most people try to go for. Like, I'm so stressed, I just want to relax, I just want to calm down. But you also need the sympathetic for when you need to do stuff, when you need to fight a bear, when you need to escape a burning building. So you, for sure, need to have stress for both positive and negative. It's not that thing that you should just never have. It's how to manage it appropriately, how to manage it in a way that's healthy, and doesn't cause suffering. So I imagine it like if you were to hold a bowling ball for 5 minutes, it would probably start to wear out your arm a bit. Of course, that makes
your muscles.
Obvious, makes sense. But hold a feather, not too heavy, but hold it out to your side for an hour. That arm is going to be wore out. Mm-hmm. And that's just light stress, long periods of time. So again, when we talk about stress, we want to think about it as not a good or bad per se. It's not about what you're carrying. It's about how you're carrying it, how long are you carrying it, things like that.
So, in the area of stress and when we experience stress,
right,
and it comes along minute by minute. I mean, it's not something that hits you in waves and it comes at you every 30 minutes or so. But we have stress that affects us based on the trauma we've experienced. It's like you said, that you need to have that awareness or alertness to fight off the bear.
Yes.
But not everybody is sitting in a situation where there's a bear present. house that we stay at in Gatlinburg in the mountains.
Mm.
Um,
As actual bears.
it has
It does.
12 bears
Oh my
that I have seen on cameras, and 12 different bears.
Yeah.
Some of these are generational bears. In other words, they were cubs, 10 years ago, and now they're grown bears. But one of the things that we have to do before we walk outside is hit the button on our car that locks the car and beeps the horn, just to make sure that there's nothing out there. And there are blind corners. I mean, you walk around the corner and you have to kind of look around the corner to make sure there's nothing there. And,
Right.
and so there is an awareness that you have to have, and that is a stressful situation, especially in a place that you're supposed to be de-stressing,
Right.
not distressing.
Yes.
Two different things. But we experience stress in our jobs. We
Yeah.
love our jobs,
Oh,
but
yeah.
they're extremely stressful. But how can we recognize that that's part of trauma that we've had in our life? I mean, that goes back to
Sure.
being a kid, being sure that what the trigger is
Mm.
that's going to set off the trauma
Mhm.
event, the
Mhm.
anger, the outburst,
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
So there's that acute awareness.
Yeah.
And that can be pretty stressful.
Yes.
Let me back up. That can be pretty distressful.
Yes.
In other words, it's causing you to be anxious all the time.
All the time. And there's so many examples. You were talking in our previous sessions, episodes, that ACEs, for instance, there's different indicators on that test, on that assessment, that relate to different types of stressors that could lead to a distress, a trauma. And depending on a relived experience in adulthood, you may respond with a distressful response based on what type of experiences you've had in the past.
Let's say that you grow up in a relatively normal household as a child.
Sure.
But you have this distressful feeling or aura around you. Could that be generational? Could that be something that happened to somebody in your ancestry?
Yeah.
That comes down the line.
There's several really interesting books. There's one called "It Didn't Start with You." Talks specifically about generational trauma, and then also very well known, very well written, highly comprehensive, nerdy scientific, but also I think practical book called "The Body Keeps the Score" by Bessel van der Kolk. Very comprehensive. They talk about the different neurochemicals and the different hormones, like cortisol, for instance, and how it can be generational and handed down through birth by mothers. But there's also examples of psychological, physiological experiences that people are having. Like there was an example of a man who, around his early 30s, was freezing cold all the time, and suddenly in life, he just found himself like his feet were in a ice, and he had this terrifying feeling of he was going to die. And come to find out, I think his grandfather, great grandfather, something had been like a lineman, was trapped in a blizzard and had died. Never heard that story growing up.
Wow.
And so to just physiologically in his body feel that experience and have that sense of dread and terror, again, that distress from no actual lived experience himself, that was pretty outrageous. I mean, I think his mom even didn't know about the story. Had to go to her mom to find out the story.
Well, Scripture says the sins of the father are passed on
Yes.
to the next, what,
third, fourth
third,
generation.
fourth generation.
That's right. And that seems to line up with the science that is being conducted and revealing when you trace out these chemicals and you trace out these hormones and you see how many generations out it takes before things kind of reset and go away. It's very interesting. It's very interesting.
What are we, 3 generations away from World War II?
Yeah, but then we had Vietnam, we've had Korea, we've had Persian Gulf, and so we've revisited traumas, and so now we have potentially compounded them generationally. Might also be, and this is something too, when we speak neurologically and chemically about trauma, there's very similar behaviors and neurological behaviors going on in the brain with AD and ADHD as is with trauma and anxiety. And so, are these higher numbers of ADHD, behavioral, genetic from traumas? Be interesting, I think, to see where the science continues to take us.
Didn't we have that conversation the other day where we were talking about ADHD being generational? In other words, it was forget how we talked about it. It was learned. I forget now that the conversation we had it was like 2 weeks ago.
That's
yeah.
So it wasn't yesterday.
Slept on that one. So,
yeah.
It'll come to me, and when
Sure.
it does, I'll bring it back up.
But I want to go back to something you were talking about too. About how a learned experience can revisit us later as distress. I'm currently in my graduate program, and every week, of course, there's plenty of reading and plenty of writing.
It's very traumatic. Yeah.
Plenty. Well, and for me growing up, I faced a lot of challenges in my schooling. Moved from country to country, and it was homeschool, and books haven't arrived yet, so we're on hold, and then it's rush, and I try to learn, and didn't really always have teachers available, and so there was a lot of struggle. And then there was integrating culturally when we moved to another culture and trying to have those experiences integrate with education. But I also remember a lot of negative messaging, a lot of comments that maybe I wasn't meant to hear from other parents around me about their doubts in my intellectual capacity. I was tested in high school for a learning disability and was discovered I had a learning disability of some kind. I don't recall the exact name of it, but went through a therapy for it. But those things all kind of affected my sense of worth and self-image and things like that. And so what's interesting, though, is now in my graduate program, every time I have to write a paper, these enormous feelings from my childhood of inadequacy and a worth come up. And so then there's this enormous distress every time I have a paper to write. It's not just, just read a couple articles and write a thing. It's this weight of how much I have to do this in order to maintain a sense of worth. And so it's I've told this to people before, that my theory with or my way of explaining anxiety very simply is that it stems from a fear of loss. And the more you have something in life, the more you have to lose. The more money you have, the more you have to lose. I think that's why the Bible says so much about letting go. Give it away. Don't hoard up your treasures on earth. And so I think that when you have a lot resting on something, there can often be a lot of distress.
True.
Take your entire retirement and throw it on a roulette table and see what your stress level does.
If it wins, I'm good.
It wins.
Oh, listen, I don't even want to talk about roulette. I had my experience with roulette when I was, a lot younger, but I did really well.
Yeah.
And the person next to me leans over and says, "It's called beginner's luck." And I
Right.
said, "Check, please." So,
But I think,
quit right now.
but I do think, when we feel like we have a lot riding on something, when there's a big, we place that perception, we place an enormous amount of importance on something. We can go from stress, which is normal and healthy, like a kid on Christmas. Okay, this is a great example. Christmas Eve, little kid, super excited about Christmas morning, can't sleep. Why? Sympathetic nervous system is saying, "Hey, wake up! You got to do something." There's this excitement.
Exciting, yeah.
Excitement is stress. It's the same thing as, "Oh no, this roller coaster is about to drop me off the side of this hill, and I'm about to have my stomach in my mouth," and
Well, the other side of it is that your unproductivity
right.
becomes stressful because you look at it and you go, "I've got this to do. I've got this to do." Like, for example, right now we're in the fall of the season, and
Huh?
and I'm looking at the yard
Oh yeah,
because I've got major oak trees in my yard,
Yep.
and 4 or 5 different kinds of leaves,
Yes.
and if you get them when they're dry, it's not that difficult,
Mm-mm.
but you get them when they're wet, it's very difficult. Well, I
We've had a
don't have a
couple
place to, I'm not burning leaves
Right,
anymore
right.
because the fire department frowns upon that. But yeah, I have this open field behind my house, and
Yes.
the field owner says, "Yeah, spread them out. That's
Right.
fine. You can spread them out throughout the field." Because he comes back in the spring and they turns them over and they're all rotted, and then
Yeah.
the nutrients back into the soil.
Yeah.
And well, he hadn't cut the crop yet.
Yeah.
And so, that's weighing on my mind and on my shoulders right now because
Right,
I'm
yeah.
looking at it, and because I rake the leaves from my neighbors, and
Right.
they're elderly and they can't get out and do it, and I don't want them to pay somebody when I'm fully capable of doing
You
that.
got a
But-
lot resting on that small
and,
task.
and
Yeah.
so, and I know that one neighbor loves her yard to be immaculate.
Yeah.
And it's real hard for her to have leaves in her yard because her husband all his life, I mean, the time that we've lived in the house next to them, has always kept the yard immaculate. No leaves. Anytime a leaf hit the ground, he'd pick it up.
Yeah.
And I've not been able to get to it.
Can't leave it alone, can you?
And man, oh man, it just wears on my head. I mean, it stresses me out because, and then I have to go back, and the way that I deal with it is I go back in my thought process and I go, "There's nothing you can do
There's no bear.
until the
Right.
crop is taken in."
Right.
Once the crop's taken in, you can
Right.
spread those leaves all over creation,
Right.
And so I've often thought that I would spread them out and spell a word,
Yeah.
and then get the drone footage of,
Right.
flying over, whatever, but, like Summit, or,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
SCU or something,
Yeah.
just this massive pile of leaves.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, but that wears on me. And that's just this massive stress that I haul around with me.
Yes.
And there's no need for me to haul it around.
Yeah.
I mean,
And like you said, sometimes it's a death by 1,000 cuts, and sometimes it's big and heavy, and in this moment, like,
yeah,
I've
it
got to
smacks
do
you
this
in
right
the middle
now.
of the forehead.
And again, I think it's a fear of loss. I think that's where anxiety really stems out of, that deep fear of losing something that we think that we have, and that's where that control issue comes in. That's where that distress it gets applied, and it's a perception that we can affect and we can work on changing.
So as a result of the stress, then I experience anxiety, anxiousness because of it.
Yeah.
Is that a result of stress, or is that just a result of something else?
Maybe a little bit of both, but I think if you are stressed about not cleaning your house and you ignore it, it grows.
And that goes back to what I was talking about, a little bit ago, where I said, the there's a stress of things that have been
Mhm.
unaccomplished.
But
you
what?
know,
Do,
so-
but could you turn those leaves into some type of excitement?
No.
I think of it. Oh, let me put it this way: when you were first telling your story, I was thinking about how many people out there might right now be thinking, "Oh, I've got to rake the leaves," and they think about it as a chore instead of thinking, "Man, I get to rake the leaves for my kids to jump in."
Yeah,
like
no,
like
that's,
make
see,
it a game. Can you make it a game? Maybe not in your case, and
I
maybe
hear
not
what
in
you're
every
saying.
case.
I hear what you're saying.
Right.
And in some instances that
Right.
that might work,
Right.
but in this instant,
Right.
I'm gonna have a big negatory on that because
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
just a
No, it's just
major
labor.
chore.
It's just
Yeah,
labor.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's because it's not just my neighbor; it's 4 yards, and each one of the yards has, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 oak trees
Mhm.
of various species.
Oh.
And, they're everything from the little, long,
Right.
pin oak
Right.
to this big,
Oh, man.
size of your hand kind of white oak
Right.
leaf, and the white oak doesn't even let go of its leaves for another 2 months.
Oh, so you got
So I
got
got
time.
some time
You
on
got a
that one.
little
Yeah.
time.
But the maples, they're dropping, they're dropping now. But,
2 foot of leaves out of the house your
glory.
yard
Yeah.
right now.
And it just, it gets crazy if and I don't like to be behind on stuff. And I usually like to have it done by Thanksgiving, and, I don't like it to be wet
Sure.
because the weight of the leaves, all this is, see, all this factors into the
Does.
processing
Yeah.
that you have, and it either becomes stressful or it becomes anxiety ridden, or and so the way that I deal with it is I rethink it, which is what you were suggesting a minute ago.
Right. Yeah.
Now rethink it into, knowing that there is nothing I can do
Right.
until this happens.
And that's important
And-
because the thing you lose when you do get stressed and distressed is your peace.
Right.
And when you can remind yourself, nothing I can do about this right now, out of my control.
And then what I
You
do is
restore
I
your
turn it
peace.
into a behavioral issue or behavioral operant conditioning issue.
Pattern,
And that is, yes, and that is there's a reward at the end. And the
Yeah.
reward is the yards look great. And they'll look great until
See?
spring.
Spin
when
it
it's-
into a positive.
and that's and I feel good about myself. I feel
Sure.
good and I feel good for my neighbors,
Yep.
because they like to have their yards taken care of and that sort of thing.
Thank you for joining us today and listening in to Sykes Peak as we continue our series and talking about stress, anxiety, and trauma. We hope that you have gained some value in listening to us today and will join us again in the future.